So good morning, everybody. Hope you had a great opportunity to check in. So happy you could be here this morning for Sunday Morning Zen. We've got a great speaker coming up, Christian Solorzano. But before we do that, Kelly wanted to take a moment to tell you about something very special that's coming up. So Kelly.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of GEMS, we're really excited and hope you're able to join us for our summer fundraiser. So mark your calendars for Saturday, July 17th. This is going to be a first of its kind where we're coming together after all of our pandemic to get together in person for an evening of socializing, light food, beverages, bonfires, right here at the ZLMC. You can buy tickets already on zlmc.org, so you can check it out there right now. Your ticket grants you one or more raffle tickets, depending on the tier you decide to support the center with. And we'll be raffling off some awesome prizes, including a beautiful singing bowl, a weekend getaway, even a night at the opera. The more raffle tickets you purchase, the more you support our center, and it increases your chances of winning all these wonderful prizes. So this is going to be an in-person only event, but we are looking forward. The GEMS are going to be creating a hybrid event later this year for our Sangha. So don't worry, for our afar members, we'll get you in soon. So this is in-person only, and we're looking forward to seeing you all there Saturday, July 17th. Check it out on zlmc.org.
Thanks so much, Kelly. If you head over to zlmc.org right now, you won't be able to miss it. It's right on the banner. But I look forward to seeing everyone there. It should be a wonderful night to remember. Thanks so much, Kelly. So as I've mentioned, this morning's speaker is Christian Solorzano. Christian's a regular contributor here at the center in terms of managing our social media and helping keep our brand on target on our website. He's a graphic designer by trade. And this morning he's going to give us a talk titled, "Look at This Beautiful Mess, the Zen of Creativity." So we're so thankful to have him here this morning. Take it away, Christian.
Hey everyone, thank you all for joining. This is my first talk ever, so I hope you could all be forgiving if anything goes astray. Let me see if I could remove my self view so I don't have to stare at myself. There you go. All right, so the title of my talk today, as Shikan mentioned, it's "Look at This Beautiful Mess, the Zen of Creativity." And before we get started, I do want to start off with a quote that I think really speaks to the nature of what I'll be speaking about. And I read this quote a few months ago, but I looked for it yesterday and I want to read it to you. And forgive me if I mispronounce some of these names. Kuan Yin declared that there were 3 stages in his understanding of the Dharma. The first stage, seeing mountain as mountain and water as water. The second stage, seeing mountain not as mountain and water not as water. The third stage, seeing mountain still as mountain and water still as water. One of the many reasons why this quote really resonates with me is because I think it perfectly highlights the creative process. I think as creatives, and I'll get into in just a bit about why I believe that we're all creative people. I think the creative process is a pretty messy process, and it involves a lot of unlearning and relearning, unlearning and relearning. We're constantly looking at the world. In this case, we're seen as a mountain. And if we want to see a mountain as a mountain, then we have to stop seeing it as a mountain in order to be able to see it as a mountain again. It's very paradoxical. It's very difficult to explain, but it kind of sums up the way I look at the creative process. As I mentioned, it's about unlearning. It's a lot about re-saying things and getting familiar with things that we might already think we're very familiar with. Creativity is very direct and it's very mundane. There's no magic to it. There's no secret to it. There's no special way to obtain it. It's very much similar to our Zen practice. I don't think as creativity as a thing that we do or a thing that we need to seek. It's rather a way of saying, and it's something that we practice all the time. So with that said, I want to do, because I do know that there's some people here that might not know much about me. I want to spend just a few minutes on my background and who I am. So I grew up as an only child up until I was 11. That's when my brother was born. But growing up, I spent a lot of time in solitude. My family and I, we moved around a lot. So I was always going from one environment to another environment. And I think because I spent so much time by myself, I almost became fascinated with very simple things like the textures of the walls, the ceiling in particular. I remember spending a lot of days just laying in my bed looking at the ceiling and trying to make out patterns in the texture of the ceiling. And I remember there was just always seeing a penguin. Like there was always a penguin, outline of a penguin, and the texture and the color of the ceiling. And that's something that to this day I still remember. And around the time I was 12 or 13, that's when I discovered rock and roll music. And in a sense, I became so infatuated with creativity and with artists and with musicians and poets and filmmakers that I almost credit my upbringing to them because they helped raise me in many ways. There's a lot of bodies of work that just feel so familiar, and I often find myself revisiting them, kind of like someone would revisit a photo album. There's certain songs, movies that just feel very special and familiar to me. So today, my profession, I'm a professional, and when I say professional, it's what I studied. I am an experienced designer, and I do a lot of business problem solving for large corporations, and I get to use creativity and design to kind of help these organizations thrive. So it's a nice experience, and it's a nice intersection to have these two worlds come together. You know, very sterile, dry corporations that are focused on making money, and then on the other side is creativity and how could creativity help those organizations create impact through their goals. And while I love doing that stuff, it's not always fulfilling, and it doesn't always provide me with the avenue and the outlet to have that opportunity for inquiry. So I use photography, I use poetry, and I use visual arts as my medium of self-expression and self-inquiry. And I think it's something that greatly complements my Zen practice, and it's something that I almost see parallel to my meditation practice, because they're both constantly in communication with one another. And if you look at some of the Zen history, you'll notice that a lot of Zen practitioners for thousands of years, they've been practicing the arts. So you see it in calligraphy and tea ceremony, ikebana, poetry, etc. So I think that there's a lot of modern mediums that allow us to continue these practices in the vernacular of today. So with that said, I do have one quick disclaimer that I hope you all find very optimistic, and it's the idea that we're all creative people. To me, creativity means leaving a trace of something that you did, something that you created, something that shows that you were intimate with something, whether it's a photograph or whether it's something that you wrote. We're always leaving traces. I don't think there's anything that you could consider non-creative. We're always leaving traces. Some traces might be more mundane, like the breadcrumbs that you might leave after eating a sandwich. If you leave the breadcrumbs and I come and photograph them after you're gone, in a sense, that's a collaboration between you and myself. We leave traces when we leave the dirty footprints after a snowy day. And as of right now, as a student of Zen that is constantly learning, as it stands right now, I often associate Zen with intimacy and knowledge, letting go, and permanence. And particularly as it relates to creativity, this morning I was thinking when we were doing the Bodhisattva vows, and when we talk about opening the Dharma gates, I think there's constantly Dharma gates that are waiting to be opened. And it's when we engage with these Dharma gates, and it's when we engage with the world, that we're able to see things more clearly, which in return significantly shapes the way that we perceive the world. So creativity, as I mentioned, it's about collaboration with the world and others. But for this talk, let's solely focus on creativity as a solitary endeavor. Creativity is about being open and receptive to what's around us. And it's about self-respect. And I say self-respect because we all have our unique life experiences. We all have our unique ways of looking at the world. And I think to have the intention to be creative and to do something, whether it's a dance, whether it's a poem, whether it's a painting, it is a form of self-respect, because we're being intentional about, we're sitting down or we're standing and we're saying, there's something now that I feel needs to be expressed, that needs to be communicated. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm allowing myself the space to do that. And I think that's quite beautiful, especially today when everything is very rapid and we're always encouraged to be productive and we're always encouraged to go, go, go. To have the intention to be creative means to slow things down and to open up to what's around us. And it's about inquiry, because as you sit down, as you begin your act of creating, you're going to learn a lot about yourself, whether it's impatience, whether it's hesitancy to do something, whether it's doubt that perhaps what you create might not be as good as what you want it to be. So it's a messy process. It's imperfect, and it's always changing. The Japanese use a term called wabi-sabi. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but it's often associated with a Japanese aesthetic that deals with this term wabi-sabi. Wabi meaning something that, and it's very similar to Zen because it's very difficult to describe. But wabi could be explained as something that's lonely, subtle, quiet, empty, whereas sabi could be withered, worn, or aged. And there's another quote that I want to bring up, and I feel like lately in a lot of these Dharma talks that we've been listening to, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche has been a figure that's been continuously coming up. And I'm currently reading one of his books. But there's a term that really stood out to me, and it's these two words, kitchen sink, the kitchen sink. So the quote is, one must not blame one's surroundings, one must not blame people, one must not blame external conditions, but without trying to change anything, just step in and try to observe. That is real contemplation on a subject. And when one is able to overcome the romantic and emotional attitude, one discovers truth even in the kitchen sink. So the whole point is not to reject, but to make use of that very moment, whatever the situation may be, and accept it and respect it. So I just want to pause there and let you guys take that quote in, because I think it's really beautiful, this idea of one being able to discover the truth even in the kitchen sink, something so ordinary and sometimes very messy and dirty. So it goes back to, what I was talking about right now with creativity as being, being a messy, complicated thing. And I think when we're able to open ourselves up to these very mundane interactions that we have with the world, there's a world of possibilities. And towards the end of my talk, I will be sharing some of my personal work, so you guys could kind of get an idea of how I translate some of these things. But now I want to go into this it's like other topic of seeing and what the word seeing actually means. So from my studies and from what I've been reading, seeing is a natural state of the mind. There is essentially no perfect scenario. I think when we discuss, the title of this talk is "Look at This Beautiful Mess," I started to question the word beautiful, and there's duality there, because when we say beautiful, we imply that there is also the possibility of ugliness. So I started thinking about what the word ugly means, and I came to a conclusion that ugliness, things that are ugly, often are things that are trying to be that we're trying to impose ourselves onto, that we're trying to change. And in a sense, they become somewhat artificial and unnatural because we're trying to alter something. So ugliness is trying to make the messy not messy, and is trying to change things. Dogen says, seeing form with the whole body and mind, hearing sound with the whole body and mind, one understands it intimately. Which we could argue is another way of, another creative application. Some obstacles that we run into when we talk about seeing and creativity is thinking of an ideal, thinking of a perfect scenario, thinking that we could take a shortcut, comparing ourselves to others, comparing ourselves to past versions of ourselves, comparing our work that we do today to work that we've done in the past, or being hopeful for something that to come out of what we're doing. In my field of design, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of trends. There's a lot of articles. There's a lot of books that try to take a shortcut and try to prevent creatives and designers with the perfect list of ways to foster creativity. Every time I see some of those lists, I almost become a little bothered by them, because I think to be intimate with the act of creating, you have to realize that it's complicated and it's not perfect, and it's something that you really can't put a lot of expectations in. You kind of just surrender to the moment and see what comes up. So with all of this talk about creativity, I want all of us, and we'll open up for the conversation in just a bit. But I want all of us to ask ourselves, like, what's the point of creating? And why do we do it? That's a question that a lot of people have been struggling with. Why do we need music? Why do we need art? We could probably do fine without it. We don't need art to survive. We don't need music to survive. We don't need paintings to survive. But I think part of the reasons why we love to create is because we document our lives. We honor life, and we recognize that it's important, and we recognize that it's worth acknowledging. And in a sense, when I'm outside and I'm with my camera and I'm taking pictures of things, like I mentioned earlier, it's a collaboration. And it's kind of interesting because there's times where I will go for a walk with my camera, and it happens. And the other thing is that sometimes you'll notice that the creative process could actually be quite beautiful, whereas other times it can be quite complicated. But the times where it feels very beautiful, and you're looking around, you almost see the world as almost posing for you and waiting to be acknowledged. It could be a tree, it could be a rock, it could be a twig, it could be a puddle. It's almost like these things are calling you, and they're inviting you to experience them, which is quite beautiful, because it kind of reminds us that we're not lonely, and we're part of this bigger ecosystem of things. And it's when we slow down and we stop being preoccupied with the many things. It's usually when we become preoccupied with things, it's usually when we miss these intimate moments of our lives that that we could almost call gaps. We tend to want to jump from one thing to the other thing, always on the go, always trying to predict the future or dwelling on the past, that we miss the beauty of very mundane objects. And in addition, this creative endeavor that we go into helps us become aware of our own self-delusion. It presents us doubt when we're confronted with an object. Those things could teach us a lot about ourselves. A literal example would be looking into a puddle and seeing your reflection. We could actually see ourselves, we could see our reflections in many things, not just things that are literal reflections. We could see ourselves when we look at a mess of trash and we start thinking that perhaps that trash was created there by a really messy person, and we start to judge. And I'm looking forward to sharing a few of these images with you guys right now, because I think it'll be helpful to describe some of these things. But before we do that, I do want to just answer this question that I often ask myself, and it's like, so I recognize that creating is this complementary practice to my Zen practice, similar to meditation. We could begin by doing this with setting an intention and trying to get ourselves out of the way. There's a great book called The Zen of Creativity by John Daido, who's actually one of the inspirations for this talk. Funny story, I would say it's probably a year ago, I was doing some online shopping and I stumbled upon an article about incense. And I looked at the author's name, and their middle name was Falcon. And I thought to myself, that's a pretty cool name, Falcon. So I reached out to them to learn a little bit more about what they were writing about. And we got into a discussion over email where we were discussing about what I originally said, Zen and creativity. And they quickly corrected me and said that there's no such thing as Zen and creativity. Because again, that's creating these two duality. So we started talking about it, and this book here says The Zen of Creativity, and the author has an interview that he does. It's on YouTube. But in the interview, he says, when he's encouraging his students to go out and photograph things, he says, go out in the spirit of openness, receptivity, and awareness. Let the subject find you. Sit in the presence of something and wait for permission. You'll know when you got it. The world is always in a state of becoming. We can think of the clouds, sun, shadows. Things are moving. Rocks are sometimes soft, and sometimes they're hard. This is a process of discovery. So before I start sharing my screen, I do want to encourage all of you, if you don't already have a creative practice, to simply start by literally going for walks with your cell phone, with your camera, and anytime you see something that speaks to you, whether it's a stop sign, a puddle, a moving car, the rain, take a picture of it. Take a picture of it. Don't expect anything. Don't expect it to be the best photo in the world. If you don't like photography, you could always take a pen with you and go sit somewhere and just document your thoughts. Something I've been doing recently, because paradoxically, I'm sometimes tired of seeing, because I'm in front of the screen all the time, that sometimes I need my eyes to take a break. I will walk around with my phone and I'll record my voice, and then I'll transcribe it later, and or I'll email it to myself, and then I use a system to transcribe it. And I've noticed that sometimes I write while I'm speaking into my phone. Essentially, creativity could be thought of as a spiritual journey. Technical knowledge is not enough, so don't feel overwhelmed and think that art or the creative arts are something that is elitist or something that is out there. We must not think of techniques as barriers. One must transcend techniques so that the art becomes an artless art, growing out of the unconscious. We need to surrender expectations and recognize that the process could be slow or it could be fast, but essentially you are the process. So with that said, Michael, I'm not sure if I have screen sharing permissions. Okay, I do. All right, let's see. Okay, could everyone see my screen? Cool, awesome. So what I'm going to be sharing are some photographs that I've taken over the past. I would say these are all probably from, the past year during the pandemic. And I think they're photos that kind of like exemplify some of the key teachings that I've been talking about. And with each photo, I'll kind of provide some quick commentary on kind of like the process that went into this. So this photo here, I was going on a walk and there was these beautiful swamps and it was a very bright day. And from the photo, it doesn't look that bright, but I remember the great thing about having a camera is that you're able to kind of mess with the settings, mess with the exposure triangle to kind of get the photo that you want to take. So with this one here, the fascination came not so much from the landscape, but from the contours and the silhouette of some of these shapes. And I think it's an example that kind of shows the way that we could reframe an object that we find and look at it a little bit differently, strip it of its color, and maybe study it, from a different point of view. So in this case, we're looking at these flowers and we're looking at these shapes, but they almost look like ink blots. This photo here, I was going for a walk in Chinatown with a friend, and we had zero expectations to really shoot anything in particular. But from a distance, we heard the meowing of a cat, and we peeked through this fence. And as you could tell from the environment, it was a house that had burned down, and there was this very old couch just sitting there. And then from the couch sprung out this cat, and I thought it was just this like beautiful like juxtaposition between something that could be perceived as ugly, this burned down home, abandoned. There's a lot of rubble all around, yet within it existed this like very like beautiful and poetic cat. And it's usually when things like this happen that you kind of recognize to just trust in the moment and not really go out with like any expectation of, today I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to find a cat sitting on a couch. It doesn't work like that. This photo here, I believe was taken in Detroit of 2020. Again, it's interesting to look at these little worlds, these little scenarios. It's not necessarily photographs, but moments and worlds. And that's something that I think subconsciously I always try to do in my photography is how can I look at a moment and respect it and honor it and freeze it. This is actually a photograph that I've shared with a few people, and the feedback that I always receive is that it looks like a painting. It's actually moving water, and underneath the surface are a lot of pebbles and rocks. And I think this here is just kind of a nice example of how sometimes you could kind of find these like these moving paintings in the world. These things that are unexpected. This was my first time ever seeing something like this. So it was nice to be able to create something in this vein and also document something that's just a fraction of a second. This photo here was taken again last year during the pandemic. I was out for a walk on the south side of Chicago, and I stumbled upon this alley, and in this alley you could tell that there was a lot of people that were homeless living there, and there was a lot of not so nice things, needles, feces, drugs, empty bottles of liquor. But I thought that it would be nice to explore this environment and kind of see what it would teach me about myself. So as I was walking around, I saw this mattress on the floor that my first reaction was, how could someone live like this? What must be wrong with them? Why would they allow themselves to get to this situation where they have to, live in the street? But then I started to look closer and I started to see some beauty in this image, in this environment. And this photo here teaches me how, despite someone's, not so nice circumstances, there is beauty there. And that beauty you can see present in the pattern of the mattress. There's some flowers printed on it, and around it you see some weeds in the cracks on the ground. So this image here could potentially teach someone about their own prejudices about the homeless, or it could also teach them to find beauty in something that could be portrayed as ugly. This image here was taken a few weeks ago. I recently moved and I have these curtains on my windows, and outside of my on the main street that I live on, at night there's a lot of traffic, and I tend to like my lights turned off after dawn. So you get these shadows from the trees casted on the windows. And sometimes when there's a very long vehicle, it blocks out the street lights, and for a quick second, the whole room is dark, and then it illuminates again. So sometimes it's kind of fascinating because I'll be sitting in my couch, staring at the wall, and the shadows from the street just move all around my wall, and you get all sorts of shapes of trees, leaves. Sometimes you get silhouettes of people walking by, and you get these beautiful moving pictures that are created, again, in collaboration with you, the viewer, and all of these subjects that are going on beyond you. These images here, I had an idea not too long ago to do some portraits. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, it's kind of difficult to find subject matter for portraits. So I started looking around my house, seeing if there was anything I could photograph in a similar vein. And I like to collect, so I enjoy flowers, and sometimes when the flowers die, I still like to keep them because I just think they're still beautiful. So I found myself photographing these roses, and I set up the whole environment similar to how you would do a portrait. And I started to just document this dead rose and analyzing it and kind of like studying its shape and its highlights. And I was kind of pleased with the result of, again, taking this inanimate object and treating it as a human. This image here, I don't know, it is a little bit dark. I don't know if you guys could see it. Sometimes it helps to turn your brightness up a little bit. I don't know if you could tell, but from my photography, I'm very fascinated by the color, by black, and by shadows and very small highlights. So this was on a rainy day, and I love the rain, and I was kind of challenging myself to find ways to capture the moment of this rainy day. So again, this was a very simple and direct process where I literally just put my camera up against my window, and I took a shot. This is another image that I took. If you're from Chicago, you know the Marina Towers, the buildings that look like the corn cobs. I work right next to that building. So on some days, we'd get this dense cloud of fog that would just pass through. And it'd be very difficult to kind of see what's out there. And I was challenging myself on how to make the unseen seen. So this was another situation where, where I'm taking a very mundane object and I'm kind of documenting it in a way that almost feels surreal, yet very real. If you were in this environment here, this is exactly how that moment looked. I think it's also fascinating to study textures and things that are very everyday occurrences. So this photo here was taken from an airplane. It's very beautiful the way that the clouds create these very organic shapes. This image here was taken, I believe, it was late last year, again on a rainy day on the south side of Chicago. I was driving around and I was fascinated by it. At nighttime, there's so many neon signs on these buildings that are trying to get people to come in. So in this case, this was a convenience store that was kind of encouraging people to go in, and there's some signage there that says free phones, a payment center, and I wanted to capture this place in a way that almost takes it out of context and reframes it as something that emphasizes its unique characteristics. So you could see the way that the window here is collaborating with the concrete and with the wet floor. There's almost this mirror-like presence in which the building is leaving a trace on something that's outside the building, which is the actual sidewalk and the road. Most recently, I've been doing a series where I've been shooting images of the Buddha. And it's been a very interesting collaboration between myself and this statue that I have. So I have on my altar, I have a Buddha statue, and beside it, I have a candle that's about 12 inches tall. So when the candle is brand new, the shadow that the statue casts is pretty small. But as the candle begins to diminish and get shorter and shorter, the shadow of the Buddha gets bigger and bigger. So there's this dance that's happening between the shadow of the Buddha and the flame. And sometimes with the wind of my room, the flame is kind of maneuvering back and forth. So the statue of the Buddha itself almost seems like it's moving, and it's almost like it's sitting with you. And it's kind of interesting to kind of develop this relationship with something that is essentially inanimate. It moves and it breathes, and it's something that kind of requires you to get in tune with what's happening in front of you. The image on the left here was taken, I would say, maybe a month ago. And this image on the right here was taken, I believe, last week. And as you could tell, the shadows are significantly different in size. This photo here, I was in Detroit and I purchased a little Buddha figurine that I was really fond of. And it's currently on top of a plant. And one day, I believe, as I was watering the plant, the statue fell, and the Buddha statue was decapitated. And instead of throwing it out and getting rid of it, I thought about how, in Zen we talk a lot about impermanence, and there's a famous quote that if you meet the Buddha, you kill the Buddha. So I thought this was kind of like a nice expression of that, where we could find some beauty in something that was once complete, but it is now incomplete, and then again making it complete again. So we had this statue that was a statue, and then it it no longer became a statue because of what happened to it. And then once again, we're kind of reconfiguring it within this context of making it a statue again. And then here are some prints that I've been making kind of with a similar, Zen approach to this. On the left here, you'll see a few days ago, there was a wasp that landed. I don't know, it got through the window and it died, and I saw it on my floor. So I was about to toss it out, but I figured, is there something I can make with this wasp? Is there something that I could, potentially some body of work that could document this experience? So not knowing really what to do, I placed the insect upon my scanner, the bed of my scanner, and I started scanning it and getting the images transferred to my computer. And it was when they were in my computer that I started to see this insect slightly bigger, that I started kind of just letting it kind of drive my intuition, and I was able to create this composition where we have three wasps, and over them you have the text that directly says found objects, because that's what they were. On the right here, you'll see I spelled out the word loving kindness, something that I've been studying lately. And rather than just writing it down or doing it on the computer, I was able to grab some of the dead rose petals that I have in my house and find ways to create this composition using something that is essentially no longer with us, but still kind of finding ways to honor it and give it some spirit. So this was actually, this project on the right here was an example of creating as something that could teach you something about yourself. The rose petals are very delicate, and there is a few occasions where I perfectly laid out everything, and then there is a gust of wind, and in a flash, everything would just go all over the place, and I would have to kind of redo it. So during the process of this, I experienced frustration, at times, joyfulness because, it was finally right, and then frustration again. But ultimately at the end, I think I came out with something that I think perfectly summarizes this creative force that I've been talking about. And these are the last two examples that I'll be sharing with you. Again, you'll probably recognize that there's this motif of flowers. On the left here, you'll see a drawing that I drew of a flower over, I think this was just some wet napkin that I had at my desk. And then I photographed it and I added some text to it that kind of, in my opinion, creates this juxtaposition between this almost very sad, nostalgic photograph with these very hopeful and optimistic words that say joy, happiness, and love. So I always try to find these two parallels that are almost in contrast to one another in my work. How could we make opposing forces kind of unite and work together? On the right, you'll see a deconstructed, another deconstructed flower. And the texture that you see on the paper is actually my fingerprints. So as I was making it, a lot of I believe the pollen from the flowers was getting on my finger. So the process was very messy. And as I was making this, I was thinking of the Heart Sutra and the words, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And it just felt very appropriate for this composition here. So I hope these images kind of help illustrate some of the themes that I talked about. But with that said, that concludes my talk, and I do want to leave some time for some questions if anyone has any. Or
Christian, do you normally shoot with the same camera? And if so, what is it?
So I shoot with I do normally shoot with the same camera. It's a Fujifilm X-T3, and it's a digital camera, but it allows me to have a lot of control over the settings. So like the aperture, the shutter speed, the ISO.
Have you always worked in digital media, or have you ever used film?
I've used film in the past. I will have to admit that I could be, I know it kind of goes counterintuitive with what I just mentioned, but I can be a little impatient when it comes to film photography, because I've done it in the past, and a lot of the images that I tend to shoot with my film camera end up not coming out like anything. I think it could be the camera. My film camera may not be working properly.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those images. They really tied your talk beautifully together. It gave depth and it helped. When they said the images say faculty, where do you teach?
So faculty is I should have mentioned that, but I create a lot of this work under that name, faculty. It's almost like this studio that I created. That's the avenue through which a lot of these things are produced. So a lot of these things, I don't necessarily publish them under my name. I publish them under the faculty name.
Oh,
Christian, I love your work. That was so wonderful to see. And I love the way you sort of find beauty in things that others would ignore or not even notice. But you find the beauty in things that are discarded.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you too. I thought, first off, doesn't it feel good to be done with your first talk? Are you relaxed now?
Yeah, well, we still got a few minutes left, so not.
Yeah, but Q&A is different though, you know. It was just a great talk, Christian. Thank you so much. I have heard so many people speak about creativity, something that is one of those words that sort of creates a little bit of anxiety in me. And I found your talk so inviting, so welcoming, so inclusive. And it helped me, you know, when you talked about creativity, about leaving a trace, wow, what a different reframe of what creativity is for me. I really, there's so many notes I took down, and I don't usually do that. So just really kudos, a really nice talk about a topic that just such a nice blend with Zen to have us think about how we see and that self-knowledge part. But I wanted to ask you, the Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche quote that you read from a book about kitchen sink. Which book was that from?
I'll get the name. I can't recall the name by
Okay.
memory, but I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I'd love to. That was a great quote. So anyway, thanks. It was really enjoyable. And I loved your images as well.
Thanks. Robin?
Christian, I just loved your presentation this morning. I just thought it was great. And I loved your images. I loved what you had to say. And I loved getting to know you better and how you look at the world. As an older person, when I go for a walk now, I can't walk fast even if I want to. But I find myself literally stopping and staring at things, you know, bending over to look inside a flower, things like that. And I'm often tempted to take pictures. Sometimes I've moved to do it, but other times I have the urge and I haven't honored it. You know, and I really feel like you gave me so much permission today to just do that, you know, because I think I've had the thought, well, what am I going to do with this picture? I don't know what to do with it, but I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm just going to take the pictures because I'm drawn to them for some reason.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I hope that you share your photos one day. I'd love to see.
Oh, thank you, Christian.
Yeah,
Thank you for a wonderful morning.
thank you. I was actually thinking yesterday about, I was in bed and I was thinking of how as children, we see the world in a very simple way. Like we look at, we say the sky is blue and we say, you know, that car is red. And we have this like very almost like elementary vocabulary of seeing the world. And as we get older, we kind of try to intellectualize things and find meaning in everything pretty much. So I think it's important to give ourselves permission to look at things for what they are. And if you think a flower speaks to you, then a flower speaks to you. And if you think it's pretty, then it's pretty, and that's it. It's nothing more, nothing less. And that's kind of the way that I approach things. I've been told that I have a few friends that tell me when I just get on these tangents of creativity and making, that they almost think that kind of speaking like a child, because I get so excited about very simple things like a color like a blue or like a green or a really yellow pencil. Like that stuff to me is it's almost magical, despite its ordinary nature.
Thank you for the empowerment. The thread that ran through everything you said was it doesn't matter whether we're ever going to show anything we take. It is something we've taken and we've captured and we can hold. And you empowered. Thank you.
I'm glad.
Kristen, the Headless Buddha was interesting. I've seen this other thing it reminds me of, and I don't know exactly which Asian country, but when a bowl cracks, they put gold in the crack,
Mm-hmm.
which, in other words, instead of this cracked bowl, something you throw out, they turn it into a thing of beauty by putting gold in the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was that reminded me of something, you know, you consider it throwaway, but it's really not. It becomes a thing of beauty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I took that photo of the beheaded Buddha and I shared it, I almost thought that it was going to get perceived as blasphemy because you're giving this holy figure that's decapitated.
Yeah.
So I was a little concerned, but I was like, it's not blasphemy. It's just a Buddha that happened to fall and its head broke. Like that's the fact. And if you think it's blasphemy, then you think it's blasphemy, and that's not what I think. And maybe that's what others think, or maybe other people won't think that. So so I think sometimes when sharing work with others, you kind of have to be like, there's some you have to kind of be brave and not really think about what people are going to think or say, because what they're going to think or say is a reflection of themselves, not really a reflection of yourself. So I'm going to think about. Tanya?
So one thing that you had told us around the middle of your talk was, what is the reason to create? And I think that the only answer that is appropriate is why not?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Shuping?
Hi, Christian. Thank you for the beautiful talk. I too like to take lots of photos, like you say, to capture the moment. So I have a question for you. So I think for people, that's what my son usually remind me. Mommy, you take too many pictures. Do you have a moment like that? And how do you do that?
I do have moments like that, and I'll give you an example. So I took photos of Liz's, who's on this call, her Jukai, last week, and I think I took about 200, and out of those 200, there was about, I don't know, 50 good ones. So I think sometimes we just need to take, like, it's totally okay to take, like, not everything that you make is going to be something that speaks to you. You might, there's a lot of yeah, I think quantity in this case could work in your favor, especially digital, like in the case of photography, like we're not running out of film, like we could always delete and take more. So, but yeah, that happens to me all the time. Like some days I will go shooting and I will come home and put them on my computer, and all the photos that I took, I just don't like at all. And that's totally okay. Or sometimes I'll take a photo and I only like a corner of it, and I will crop it and make that be a photo. So I think there's no rules. I think whatever works for you, if taking a lot of photos for you works, then go ahead and do that. Other people, you know, work differently, and I don't think there's a right or wrong. And something I've been trying to really advocate for is getting rid of this idea of art as being something that is like elitist, or something that is, this very high thing. Like it's not. It's something that's very grounded in the everyday. So yeah, keep shooting. Barb.
First of all, thank you so much. What a wonderful, I just feel so nourished and encouraged in creativity. I'm sort of a shy creative, and I mean, I put my pictures up on Facebook and stuff, but I don't share other things, and I realize that that's not really important, that I'm sharing them with myself while I'm doing it, and that intimacy is really important. And I too love getting a picture and then just zooming it and looking at all different parts of it. And sometimes what I love isn't even the picture, it's textures and colors, and it's something completely different that you'd never know was in that bush or that bird wing or whatever it is. So I really appreciate how you, I felt anyway, just opened up in creativity and welcomed into it in a way that I haven't in a while. And I appreciate your sort of, so I felt like I was receiving unassuming wisdom today, and I'm grateful. Thanks for the work you put in to bring it to us.
Of course.
Christian, when you said that art's not elitist, I was thinking of graffiti.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very visible for everyone. And it's not done by anybody elite. It's done by probably, a whole lot of different urban kids or young adults.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I often, like, it was a few days ago, I was looking at there's a Picasso piece that sold for a few $1 million, and they were doing an auctioning of it, and no one was talking about the art itself. They were talking about the price, and it was almost like they were celebrating how expensive it was rather than anything about it. So that's something that I am kind of not really into, when you're placing almost more value over a photograph or a work of art, rather than when you're thinking more about like the value of it as opposed to what it actually is. And I think it's a perfect scenario in like graffiti. Like I think there's significant value in that, or there might not be significant value of it. And I think it's really not dependent on what the collective things, but the individual relationship between the viewer and the creator. Awesome. I know we're almost at time.
Thank you for a wonderful talk, Christian.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Sweet.
Take care, everyone.